All right, everyone. Looks like we have several participants logged on with us here tonight. So we'll go ahead and get it started. Hello, everybody. Welcome again to this evening's Artist Talk. I apologize that you had to stare at me there for a few moments while I was getting situated here. But again, I hope that we're taking this moment to enjoy this beautiful graphic for the exhibition that we are talking about our talented artists with here tonight. So better late than never. So everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight's Artist Talk will be featuring our 5 talented artists that were selected as part of our Summer 2020 Artist Residency here at California Botanic Garden. We had well over 100 applicants. So believe me when I say that these 5 are incredibly talented to have been selected to create here in the garden. So let's give a warm round of applause, silently from home, of course, to our wonderful artists here. So let's see, moving forward, we had a 3-week residency here that these artists got to create in our space during. And we presented this artist residency in a time when access was limited due to the pandemic and everything that has been going on recently. And the theme of the residency and of the current exhibitions that are up both on site and online is homing, which refers to a journey where one returns to a place they remember after traveling a long distance away from it. Ironically, to explore what the process of homing means for them, the 5 artists ventured beyond the comforts of their own homes during these times and explored the garden, where California's native plants embody the definition of home in the truest sense, as well as their own personal definition of what homing means to them. Joining us today, we have Margaret Gallagher, Hannah Michael Flynn, Miwa Matreyek, Eliza Swann, and John Zane Zappas. I'm thrilled to introduce them to you, and each of them will now give a brief introduction to their work and the ideas behind the projects that they created during their residency. So we are going to go in alphabetical order. We'll start with Margaret, and let me go ahead and get her presentation pulled up here. All right, Margaret, ready?
Yeah, can you go back to the first slide?
Absolutely. I'm just trying to jump. Wow. I'm just trying to jump ahead here. All right, ready when you are. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm really honored to be here and excited to take a few minutes to talk to you about this project that I created as part of the residency. So what I did was make a zine, which probably most of you are familiar with, but if you're not, it's sort of a small kind of DIY booklet or book, usually made by an artist. And my zine is called Wildlife of Southern California, or Vida Silvestre del Sur de California. And it's a bilingual illustrated guide to some of the common plants and animals of our area. Can you go to the next slide? So to describe this project a little bit, it's 16 pages long, and I made a total of 6 illustrations for it. And I decided to, unlike a typical field guide, I decided to group the species in the guide in an ecological way rather than in a taxonomic way. So they're not grouped together by all the animals or all the plants. What I did was choose kind of typical scenes that you might find in the environment of Southern California and some of the plants and animals that you might find there. And then I talked a little bit about each one of those species in English and Spanish, and I included the common names in English and Spanish, as well as the scientific name. And the descriptions that I included aren't really particularly in depth. They're sort of like kind of a brief overview of like what, for example, a bobcat here, what the bobcat looks like, and a little bit about its behavior. And I think for the bobcat, I mentioned that one of its prey animals is, for example, the California ground squirrel, which is also found in the drawing. And then the other plants, the other species in here, you have an oak tree and poison oak, which is often found underneath an oak tree. And I included a scrub jay, which eats acorns. So as you see, you have this sort of ecological picture that, and the idea is that, maybe a beginner to nature might just go out into a park or into our local mountains, and this might be a scene that they encounter. And they don't have to hunt for all these different species within this little guide. Can you go to the next page, Danielle? So this is the first spread in the guide. And I chose to feature 2 of our local hummingbirds, the Anna's hummingbird and the Allen's hummingbird, and then 2 of their common food plants, hummingbird sage and California fuchsia. So the driving force behind this was really inspired by what's going on in our society right now. And what I came out of it are sort of 2 dual purposes. And the first one is, the idea that in this COVID world, people can't visit an art exhibition like they normally can. And so I wanted to approach creating something that was a lot more accessible to people than, for example, like a gallery show, which is the form a lot of my artwork has taken in the past. So it was really, I encouraged myself, the residency encouraged me to think outside of the box in that way. And then the other big driving force was I wanted to use my artwork to address an issue of equity and access. And that's something that we have been talking a lot about over the past couple months. And I really spent a lot of time reflecting as an artist, like where is my place in that conversation? And art is sort of like my special ability, and how can I use it to put it really, boil it down too much, to like make the world a better place, but really specifically to how can I use it to address the issues of inequality and access in the world of nature education. And there really is, as I've learned, a lack of resources for Spanish speakers about native plants and animals. So I wanted to use this project to address that. So the Spanish names, this really actually took up most of the time on this project, and I thought it was going to be as simple as like doing some internet searches and finding Spanish names, and it was not that simple at all, and a bunch of people helped me with this. It was really a group effort. So I started by looking online, and I really couldn't find anything that was like comprehensive or reliable. There's Wikipedia in Spanish, but I didn't think that I could rely on that. And I ended up finding some random websites and stuff that had names, but it was really important to me to every name that I included in Spanish to have it corroborated somewhere. So I ended up reaching out to, or having these people reach out to me, a bunch of different local naturalists, including Brenda Kyle, Tanya Romero, Tanatsin Romero, and Josh Cano, who's someone I found on Facebook, who's actually in Mexico. And all those people, through their joint efforts, I was able to put together what I felt was like a really reliable list of Spanish names, and specifically Spanish names for our area, because for a lot of organisms, a name that's used like on the other side of the country or in a different country isn't necessarily the name that you would use here. Like, for example, we call it a mountain lion, but in other parts of the US, you would call it a cougar or a puma, which aren't wrong, but that's just not it's not the common name that we use here. So I made my best effort, and I think I succeeded pretty well to just be as locally specific as I could. And then one example that I actually wanted to mention is the California fuchsia, and that was a plant that I had a really hard time finding, and I kind of decided in the end that maybe there isn't a local Spanish name for it. And so I suggested 2 names. One was a direct translation, Fuchsia de California, and then the other one was a name that I invented myself. But I made sure to make a note of that in the guide so nobody would be like, what is this crazy name? I've never heard of it before. But maybe it'll catch on, who can say. Hopefully people will read it and find one of those names, think it makes sense. Anyway, so the last really important thing about this guide is I wanted it to be financially accessible to anybody who wants to get their hands on it. So I set up, if you go to the garden, you can get a copy totally for free. You can just pick one up. But I'm selling it on my website, and I set up a sliding scale so that folks can also get a copy totally for free on my website, or they can pay $5 for a copy, or any dollar beyond that goes to fund the printing of a free copy. So I really, really want to get these into the hands of people who would find them interesting and useful, especially Spanish speakers. And so that's why I set it up that way. And because of people's generosity, I've been able to fund over 300 copies, which I can donate to local nature centers and nature organizations. So I'm really, really excited about that, and really, really grateful to everyone who's contributed. And the last thing I want to say is, if you work with or know of a nature organization who you think would be interested in them, have them shoot me an email, because I have a lot of free copies to donate. And thank you so much to the California Botanic Garden. Sorry, I kind of talked my head off there, but I had a lot that I wanted to get through. This is my favorite drawing from the guide, that last one.
Wonderful. Thank you, Margaret. We very much appreciate you sharing with us. Alrighty, up next we have Hannah Michael Flynn. Hannah, are you ready?
I'm ready.
On deck. All right, let's pull your slides up here. Alrighty, take us away.
Oh, can you go back to the title slide?
So sorry about that. Go ahead, all yours.
Google Slides works in mysterious ways. So hi everyone, I'm Hannah Michael Flynn. Really excited to be here tonight and tell you about the work that I did for the homing residency. Next slide, please. So just a quick about me. I was born and raised in LA. I moved to Chicago for 5.5 years, where I got my undergrad, studied environmental studies and art. And living in Chicago was really important because it's where I started to walk around more. It's a much more walkable city. There's great transit, great bike infrastructure. And that's where I really started to get an appreciation for small urban vignettes, and just really observing the city on the scale of being a pedestrian. And so now I'm back in LA. I'm studying landscape architecture and urban planning at USC, and I think that's pretty appropriate for those interests. Also, just as a side note, I wanted to mention, if you'd like to download a copy of these slides, or if you'd like alt text with the images, you can go to the URL that's on that slide, and that URL will also be on the end slide. Next slide, please. So really quickly, I wanted to mention the name that I work under is epiphytes. An epiphyte is a type of plant that doesn't grow in soil, or it can, but what it really prefers to do is grow on other plants and trees and such. And it's not really like a parasitic relationship or anything. It's just kind of happy growing on something else. And as a plant person, that name really tickled me for an artistic practice, since what I like to draw and design are these kind of busy illustrations that I see living on another object. And so they're kind of like their own version of epiphytes. And so these are two of my favorite patterns. I also like that the name draws plants to mind, even if the drawing itself isn't necessarily about plants. Next slide. Oh, we may have lost Danielle.
Is it showing?
There we go. Yeah, it's showing now. I think you just froze with it. So for the residency, I created the SoCal iconography bandanas, and I chose the word iconography because it means a range or a system of types of images used by an artist to convey particular meanings. That's not my definition. I took that from the Tate Museum's website. But what I set out to do was to find iconography to capture 3 different senses of Southern California or Los Angeles as home. And some of you eagle-eyed attendees may have already noticed that there are 3 different colors of bandanas, and so 1 design per bandana color. And so I installed the bandanas in the pavilion in the California cultivar garden at the garden, because it was an ideal place to sit and contemplate what visitors have seen in the garden, as well as their own more likely urban lived experience expressed through the art. And so it's kind of a frame for an already beautiful gathering space and encourages people to sit and think and observe. And as a side note, the reason why I went with bandanas, first off, I like the idea of taking home with you. Bandana is wearable art. And then the sale of the bandanas, I like that it was something that I could sell, because what I'm doing is I'm raising money for a charity called K-Town for All. They're an LA-based, Koreatown-based charity that works on homeless outreach through direct action and also advocacy. And so I wanted to do something that could benefit an organization. And then also the process of making the bandanas. By picking this, I was able to use entirely sources that were also in LA. The linen is from a business in West Hollywood, and I worked with a Chinatown-based print shop to have the design screen printed. All right, so let's take a look at the 3 bandanas. If you could go to the next slide. So the first one I call the personal bandana. This one has my own iconography of what I think of the city of LA. So you can see poppies, sycamore seeds, street furniture, so that's furniture found on the street. The chair there is inspired by an actual chair that I picked up out of an alley somewhere. Breeze blocks, that mid-century modern desert architecture staple, and things being on fire. Next slide. And so this one, I admit I cheated a little bit. I actually came up with the personal bandana under the name LA Iconography Bandana for the Coffee Means Confidence market back in March. It was the last thing that I did before everything shut down. But they were block printed. And so I saw this as an opportunity to refine them and kind of up the quality of the bandanas. Next slide. And so this is just some proof of this being my own personal iconography. On the left, you see a note that's on my phone that's a guide of breeze blocks, good breeze blocks that I've found around the city. And on the right is a picture of my parents' dog, Bart, in front of some poppies. Next slide, please. All right, so the second bandana is the urban bandana. I consider this to be the more urban iconography of living in LA or SoCal City. So on the border, you see abstracted freeway ramps. You can also see crows perched on electrical wires and palm trees, and I picked California fan palms, the only native palm in California. There's a dingbat star and some creeping morning glory, and also some bougainvillea vining up the palm trees. Next slide. So my method for collecting these images was I went on Instagram, and if you're not familiar with how Instagram works, this is what's called a story. It's something that's visible to anybody who checks out my profile for 24 hours. And so I put up a question box. And so here's a screenshot of the question box I put up. And I used a picture of breeze blocks because I wanted to use something that was my own personal iconography and not like the Hollywood sign or palm trees or the ocean or something that might be more obvious. I wanted to kind of inspire people to think about their own images. So on the next slide, you'll see some examples of some answers. We had mid-century apartments, lots of mention of palm trees, freeways, really like the middle left one, double-decker strip malls. There's a good range of answers, and this is about half of the answers that I received here. But it was great to get an idea of what people thought of when they thought of LA as home. And so I incorporated a couple of those. Obviously, I didn't do all of them. I wasn't sure how I was going to illustrate the strip malls. Next slide. Thank you. So the final one is the nature bandana. And so nature is a bit of a fraught term. What really is nature? What really have we not intervened with? And so what I settled on for here was what is here that doesn't show anything that is man-made. Or in terms of like structures or objects. And so on this bandana, we have tiger lizards on the outside. Somebody, I think it might have been David, said that they looked like gargoyles. Sacred Datura and Ceanothus on the sides. On the top panel, we have Coast Live Oak and Toyon. And on the bottom panel, we have a snippet of the Santa Monica Mountains with ocean ripples coming out of the top into the sky. And then at the bottom is a kind of, I left it ambiguous intentionally, whether it was marine layer fog or smog, could be both. So next slide. And so my process for gathering these images was kind of twofold. So a couple of anecdotes with the tiger lizards. Back in my proposal for this residency, I said that one thing that would benefit me about access to the garden is that I could follow people around and see what they reacted to and see what people I really grokked with or identified with. And so I did, on my first visit to the garden, I really did try to sneak around and follow people as distanced and non-creepily as possible. And the only thing I saw anybody react to was a lizard. And so I figured that, I wanted to capture that a lizard moment on the bandanas. And then with the sacred datura, datura is a beautiful night blooming plant with gorgeous white flowers. I recommend you look them up if you're not familiar with them. And I've seen in kind of native plant circles, I've seen many beautiful photos and drawings of datura. But every time, because I tend to go out in the day and it's night blooming, every time I see datura, it is folded up like this. It's not blooming because it's the daytime, it's too hot. So I wanted to illustrate datura as I'm used to seeing them. And on the next slide, I also looked more at the natural history of LA and of the Southern California area. So the first toyon trees, this is a story I already knew, where toyon is also known as the California holly, which, since there was plenty of it growing near the Santa Monica Mountains in the Calabasas Pass, that's how Hollywood gets its name, but not actually. As I was doing research for this residency, I learned that that's not actually the story. In 1886, I believe, a developer purchased 120 acres of land in the area, creating, his last name was Wilcox, and he was just called the Wilcox subdivision. But a year later, his wife was on a train and met a wealthy man from Illinois, and he had an estate called Hollywood, and she just thought that was a great name. So they just stole the name to name it Hollywood. And ironically, holly is actually a really rare tree in Illinois, so I don't even know how that name ended up there. Ceanothus is also known as the California lilac. It's a beautiful flowering shrub tree, and there's just a really large amount of diversity in the Ceanothus, genus, family. I'm not sure exactly what the term is. Thank you, Danielle. And they're found throughout California Botanic Garden, as well as just many other sites that I've been to. And so I wanted to include those. Oaks are, as many of you are aware, are very common in Southern California, and actually did end up rightfully naming several cities and neighborhoods like Sherman Oaks and Thousand Oaks. I wanted to include those. And then the Santa Monica Mountains, especially with the ocean ripples coming out of the top. So way, way back, if you go back to 16 million years ago, the Santa Monica Mountains were underwater, and you can still find evidence of that with fossils that can be found there to this day. And yeah, next slide, please. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for listening and for coming today, and thanks to the Botanic Garden for having me on as part of this residency. You can contact me anywhere here on the slide, and again, if you'd like to download the slides, you can go to the link below.
All right, great. Thank you, Hannah. Let's see. Let's get our next PowerPoint rolling here. All right, next up, I would like to introduce Miwa Matreyek. Miwa, are you ready?
Okay, I'm muted. You know, let's skip the video just because I don't want to take up that amount of time, and I'll just kind of talk about it and people can just find it, so.
All right, sounds good. Yes, so what we will pull up your presentation, and anybody who hasn't already seen Miwa's video, you can go to our website, www.calbg.org, and there's a nice little square on the home page for that says Artist Residency, and you can view her video there. All right, let's begin. Take it away.
Oh, I think
let me go back.
Other ones, yeah.
Google Slides is really doing its own thing tonight. All right, Miwa, there you go.
Somehow I didn't think to put like text on the slide, so it's just images. But I just want to give a little background as to the kind of work that I do, which is normally I'm making moving images, video animation for a live performance. So there's a few images, this one and the next one. You can go to the next slide. And the next one from my most recent performance piece, where I'm using projection onto a screen in my own actual body behind the screen as a shadow interacting with the images in the projection. This piece is called Infinitely Yours. It just premiered this January, and I didn't get to tour it very much because of the pandemic. But it is about climate change, and there's a lot of California landscapes incorporated into it, and a lot of things from daily life, like from my daily, or from just like my world in terms of going on a road trip and filming an oil field that later became part of this piece, or the previous slide, which is incorporating my own plastic trash into a scene where I'm drowning in an ocean full of plastic. If you want to go back one just to show it again, yeah. And then if you go forward too, I also have a theater company named Cloud Eye Control. So again, using video and projection, moving images, animation, along with live performance and live bodies, and kind of creating these ways of like, I feel like my work often kind of imagines invisible systems and invisible worlds, kind of like the larger world kind of condensed into visual metaphors, and how our bodies are placed into these spaces. Again, whether it be kind of these metaphorical worlds of climate change, or in this case, this piece that there's 2 more slides of was inspired by the Fukushima nuclear disaster, although it kind of became abstracted into like an invisible disaster and a threat, which kind of, you could go to the next slide, and also the next slide as well, which kind of resonates with the pandemic as well, in terms of how do you protect yourself from a disaster that you can't see. So with that, we could go to the next slide, which starts a few still images from the video that I did make for the residency. And part of the reason why I applied for residency is that, most of the work that I make take me 1, 2, 3 years to make. They're kind of like large productions. So it was kind of exciting to have a reason to make something pretty quick for me. So in this case, I made a short film. I think it's like 2 minutes and 45 seconds. It's on Vimeo, and again on the web gallery for the Botanic Gardens. But in the process of making this piece too, I normally don't incorporate my own voice. I normally avoid using text, but that was another part of the experiment of doing this kind of short turnaround project through the residency. So the piece kind of starts with musings, because it's about like California native plants and sort of this place that we're in California, but also during the pandemic, a lot of my experience is about being at home. So the first section kind of muses about the idea of home, whether it be literally the apartment that I'm in, or the home, sort of like the larger ecosystem that we're in here in Southern California. And, being in lockdown, at stay at home, just how aware I've become of light in my apartment. And also because it's spanned for so many months, noticing the different angles that light fall into the windows, or when light actually starts to cast on things that it didn't cast light on back in March. So those kinds of things have been kind of interesting, and just kind of like seeing how cinematic light is, just pure light and shadow. So there's sort of a musing exploration of that in my own apartment. If you go to the next slide. So the second section in the video is kind of about, again, musing about what it means to be a Californian for me. And I think that kind of resonates with the theme of the residency, the homing, in terms of, I can't remember if it was homing or homecoming. But
Homing, yes, homing.
Homing, okay, yeah. Sort of this, normally I travel a lot because I tour with my shows, and the sense of when you're somewhere else and the atmosphere feels different, the clouds look different, the plants look different, the way that they grow looks different. But then coming back to the familiar back in California, and sort of like this sense of comfort that you feel to be somewhere familiar that I've been familiar with for 30 years of my life, from when I moved here, when I was like 10, just kind of up and down Northern and Southern California. So I kind of talk about the things that I find comfort in and feel is so familiar that it's kind of like a second skin as a Californian. And then the third section, if you go to the next slide, is about this idea. So this is a term that I found to an Instagram account for a magazine called Atmos, A-T-M-O-S. I haven't found the magazine, but I've just been following the Instagram where they, put little articles and stuff. But self-nostalgia is the idea here. I'll just read a quote. It describes a form of emotional or existential distress caused by environmental change. It is best described as a lived experience of negatively perceived environmental change, often associated with climate change. But it's sort of, again, like the home that the ecosystem that changing around you and becoming unfamiliar and feeling sort of like left behind by it. And I think we're feeling that sense, a lot of us, like one on the level of the pandemic and like just my neighborhood, the outside that I'm so familiar with, feeling a little bit alien, feeling like I can't be out there. I have to like strategize paths in order to feel safe out there. And of course there's, climate change. Wildfires are familiar things in California, but we definitely are feeling a sense of it kind of spiraling out of control these days. Even some of the heat waves that we had, some of it happened during the residency, so I had to avoid going, unfortunately, because just for health reasons, I couldn't be like out in that high of a heat. So I think there is kind of a sense of, I think for a lot of us, of sort of, the familiar becoming unfamiliar in terms of the world that we feel that we know so well outside. And I think there's also, for me, I think it's probably another common experience with the pandemic and with climate change that some people are considering. I mean, I also live in the middle of the city in Koreatown, kind of like as family situations shift and maybe like think about going somewhere else. So I think there's also already a nostalgia that I'm feeling for California, again, as a place that I know so well, that I'm considering moving. So I think there's like this nostalgia and kind of sadness of thinking about California in this video as well. So there's kind of a lot wrapped in a lot of things and different scales of home. I think there's another slide after this. And also, again, like different scales of home, like home could be me inside of my apartment, but home could also be the world outside and all the things I'm familiar with. So there's a lot kind of mixed into the video, but I would consider it kind of like a video essay, I guess, a short one where I'm kind of talking about my musings, and I'm not sure if there's a conclusion, but hopefully kind of leads the audience into thinking about these ideas with me. So that's about it for what I wanted to say about the video.
All right, great. Thank you, Miwa. And again, if anybody is interested in watching her video, I recommend it. It's on our website. Definitely give it a watch. You just had a sneak peek there with the images that Miwa shared with us. Alrighty, up next is Eliza Swann.
Yay, hi.
All right, let me pull your slides up here and we will begin.
Okay.
Let me, sorry here. Alrighty, take it away.
Seems like maybe you're starting on number 6. If you want to go back to 1.
It keeps doing that for
froze.
everybody. Let's get back. Let's get back to slide number 1. All right.
Oh yeah, okay. Okay, cool. So my name's Eliza Swann, and I'm an artist, and I work in lots of different mediums, sometimes performance, sometimes text, sometimes painting, sometimes video. This is a still from a book of dance scripts that I made called Ripe for Pleasure, and you read these dance scripts as you go for a walk, and they help you connect in with your environment. Next slide. And this is a still from a film that I made called A Bright Hand in Darkness. It's an adaptation of Ursula Le Guin's novel, The Left Hand of Darkness, which experiments or explores ideas of gender and love and climate change. So a lot of my performance work and video work deals with loss and change and connecting to our shifting planet. Okay, next slide. This is a still from a film that I made called Baba Yaga, and the soundtrack to it has a bunch of women describing their initiations into nature-based faiths. And the sound is layered on top of me trying to perform some of what they were describing. Next slide. This is a photograph. It's a still from a performance that I did with my friend Ava. It's called Earth Ecstasy. We dressed her up like an elf and tried to kind of hide her in this landscape. Next slide. And this is a collage that I've done. Next slide. I feel like kind of motoring through all these slides. This collage is called The Wheel. It's a painting made in response to me trying to read and understand the Gnostic Gospels, which were texts that my family had read throughout my childhood. Next slide. And this is a still from a performance that I did. So most of my work focuses on the kind of overlap between art, metaphysics, and ecology. And I went to graduate school for fine art and was discouraged from talking about metaphysics and psychic phenomena in the fine art world. And then when I would go over into kind of mindfulness spaces or magical spaces, I was discouraged from making big public art performances. And so I ended up establishing my own school called the Golden Dome School that was built for artists who are interested in mystical practice and ecology. And we do a performance every year, although we skipped this year, called The Resurrection of Care, that was made in response to a group called Bohemian Grove up in Northern California. It's all these politicians and millionaire businessmen. It's an all-male club, get together and do a performance called The Cremation of Care, where they destroy the idea of caring. It's a real thing, you can Google it. And so the destruction of care seems evident in how things are managed in this country. And so every year we do the resurrection of care on the heels of their cremation of care to kind of undo their ritual. Next slide. So that's the Golden Dome School doing practices that I developed alongside other people that help folks do deep listening, which was developed by a musician named Pauline Oliveros, where you use your ears to acclimate to new environments. And we do a lot of performance practices that are about kind of mimicking and enmeshing ourselves in the natural world and figuring out how to soften and open up and listen to it before we act or make work about it or on top of it. Next slide is another Golden Dome School performance. This is someone trying to orient themselves in the same direction as that big branch that overhung the space where we did a lot of our class work. So a lot of my art these days is not so much me presenting personal work or anything in galleries. It's become much more about kind of teaching and learning and doing collaborative exercises that help people become intuitively soft and sensitive to our environment, our moment, each other. Many of the people I work with are activists, and we get together and do artist residencies and performances that are about responsiveness outside of white wall galleries or kind of the landscape of museums, which I feel like attempt to become void of place. Next slide is, I think, what I made. So I ended up applying to work at the California Botanic Gardens. I'd given up having a personal artist studio. I'd spent most of my time doing collaborative performance and working on the Golden Dome School. And doing a lot of public performance out on the street. And I really wanted to figure out how to return to a personal practice since I was in quarantine. And I was elated to be invited to work at the California Botanic Gardens as a studio space, but I didn't really know how to do it. I had kind of lost touch with how to be a solo artist. So there's an episode of Unsolved Mysteries that I really loved where this woman claimed that she could make gold leak out of the pores of her face. So I tried to replicate her metaphysical hoax in the garden so that I could mimic what sunflowers look like. And that performance didn't work out so well, but it led me to kind of rethink how I was approaching the California Botanic Gardens and just kind of the sight of being an artist in the garden at all. And so I stopped and started doing deep listening practices with the garden, and really just hearing what the soil and the water and the animals and the flowers had to say. And so I took notes and made lots of photographs and video notes and ended up making a short video that is my interpretation of what the California Botanic Garden is saying. And the next slide is a still from the video. I'm actually gonna skip playing the video. It's only 1.5 minutes, but I feel like folks can go look at it on the webpage. But the video is me trying to translate what I thought the California Botanic Garden had to say. And it was a really profound, beautiful, sensitive, intimate experience with the garden. And it was a real reawakening to what making art in this time and place could be about. So I'm super thankful for the opportunity to do this residency and to see everyone's work and to hear how much overlap there is in people's commitment to paying attention to what is happening in the natural world, both within and around ourselves. So that's that.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Eliza. Similarly, I very much recommend everybody heads over to our website, www.calbg.org, and watch Eliza's video. We have they created 2 really great videos for us to watch here. Alrighty, last but not least, we have John Zane Zappas. John, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, let's cue it up here.
Okay. And yeah, I'm just grateful to be here and wanted to thank all the other artists for sharing their wonderful work and their ideas. This has been a inspiring experience for me on a lot of levels personally, but also just hearing how everyone approaches, you know, the gardens and the subject matter of their work respectively is really great. So thank you to everyone. Are the slides going? I can't really see.
They are, yes, I have them pulled up. Let's see. I should be sharing my screen. Can you not see them? John, can you see them?
Am I back? Did I just disappear?
I think you did. I think we lost you for a moment there.
Okay, well, if everybody can hear me and is everything good? Okay.
We can hear you. You're able to see the screen?
Yeah, everything looks good from here. I'll go ahead and try and get underway and not take up too much time here. I just wanted to start with some of my recent work. My practice is centered on producing non-representational sculpture and drawings that are expressive, organic, and often whimsical. So you could hit the next slide, please. So these images that I'm showing first are from a 2-person show I had last November with Carolina Maskowitz at Ochi Projects here in LA. All of the drawings are my work and the sculptures, the mobiles are hers, and she used salvaged wood from Malibu after the Woolsey fire to make that work. And I should mention that similarly, a lot of the materials I work with are salvage, and you could go to the next slide, please. And for this show, all of the panels that I was drawing on were sourced from the as is section of IKEA. So they are all pieces of mismatched furniture that I buy for very inexpensive prices and then take back to the studio. to make the drawings. So my compositions are never really planned in advance. They sort of flow from a meditative and intuitive space. And I'm always kind of trying to find ways to complicate the lines in relationship to themselves and surprise myself or confuse myself even. So you could go to the next slide, please. And for this show in particular, I wanted to focus on an experience I had while hiking in the Santa Monica Mountains, where I laid back onto a rock and sort of felt my individual sense of self melt away into a more networked consciousness of all the plants around me. And so I just sort of held that idea in my mind and as I was making the work. And you could go to the next slide. And I was almost done with the show before it really registered that many of the drawings sort of represented these hybridized figures and plant life. And that's something that I really like, the ambiguity of these works, but I also like when they gel into something that might register as representing something else. And I think the way that's slippery between different viewers is really something that I enjoy with this work. So you could go to the next slide, please. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of the sculptures that I make. When I'm making sculpture or drawings, my aim is to sort of like create an embodied resonance with the viewer, a certain sort of perceptual awareness of their body and its relationship to its surroundings. Sculptures like this, which is a back massager, sort of, they seek to create like more than just a visual relationship with the viewer. And this piece is carved from paralam, which is a engineered wood used in construction. So similar to the panels that I'm using from IKEA, these pieces are also made from particle board. So my aim is to sort of transform these materials that have been sort of forsaken by the mechanisms of capitalism into a contemporary artifact that invites reflection or ritual action, or some sort of bodily or psychic connection. Next slide, please. Oh, well, it's not really moving on my end. I don't know. I'm gonna just keep going. Oh, there, those are some bowls made from particle board and they're burned. And so we can just keep it rolling. I'm trying to get through so we have time for questions. And I think I have a shot of a show that I had 2017. And the central sculpture is called Straw Throne and is made from coiled up erosion control wattles. So they have these on the sides of freeway embankments and developments around Southern California. Next slide, please. And so this last piece I'm showing from before the residency is from a series of ashtray sculptures that I started in 2015. I've used palm and avocado wood in the past. This one is eucalyptus. And for me, using a material that is a non-native species that has still become associated with California as a way to question the narrative of utopia that's often projected onto this place. And casting these works as ashtrays and using the burned surface as a way to like both honor the material and the time invested, but also mourn the circumstance that put these plants in this place and then sort of erase them with such little concern. So yeah, these sculptures are sort of primarily for sculptures, and the functionality is sort of a suggested thing that is parallel to that. So next slide, please. Showing the work that I made for the residency. So when I found out that I got the residency, I was really excited about the opportunity to leave my house and spend some time in the natural world doing some drawings. So I did that. I spent as much time as I could making drawings. This is a picture of the installation of the some of the drawings I made at the garden. So I made over 100 drawings and then selected 12 of them to pair with short verses that I combined into a small booklet. So you could go to the next slide, please. And the pages of the booklet were printed double-sided with an image on one and a text on the other, and compiled in an envelope with an edition of 75 that is available to visitors at the garden, as well as online in a PDF for download and printing on your own. Next slide, please. And so then these pages of the book were laminated onto plywood panels that visitors can interact with and change the order of. And so there's double-sided as well, mimicking the unbound book and how it's sort of infinitely adaptable. Next slide is just some pictures of some of the plants that I gravitated towards looking at while I was spending time in the garden. And over the last 8 years, my work has become increasingly influenced by the natural world, and specifically the diverse vocabulary of growth and adaptation found in plants. And these images that I took sort of represent the kind of moments that inspired me to make the drawings that made up the piece. So next slide, I'm just going to show some of the pages from the book and talk a little bit, and we're almost done. So we can kind of blast through these last ones. So yeah, I was thinking a lot about struggles and bounty and adaptations and reactions that plants make that all sort of become physicalized in its form. You know, I think that it's sort of interesting that plants can't run from their problems, that they need to sort of adapt, and then those adaptations sort of like give rise to what we see out in the world. Yeah, and although humans don't have the same kind of visual record of our past that plants do, our traumas and generations of struggle tend to be embedded in our living tissue and can be triggered and recalled sort of at random sometimes, it seems. So these past emotions are often not visible to us. And for me, looking at plants and seeing the way that they interact with their environments and the challenges there gives me the perspective to sort of like have some distance and visibility to my own struggles in life. And I think right now in the world, there are plenty of struggles. And yeah, I was sort of taking some inspiration and solace from the way plants deal with those things. So that's all I got for you guys.
Great, thank you so much for sharing, John. All right, let's see, everybody. Okay, so we just have a few questions that I will pose to all of the artists as a group. And then we also have time for Q&A from the audience that my colleague Kristen will help us out with. Let's see, so for our first question to the group, and go ahead and unmute yourselves, answer as you wish. Let's see here. During the residency, there were wildfires burning all over California, coupled with a raging heat wave, a couple of you mentioned. What was being at the garden like during this time, and how did it affect your engagement with the surrounding environment?
Well, if I will say, I remember one of the first times that I went, I ended up, for those of you who aren't familiar with the garden, there's this section that's kind of at the back of the garden that's like 50 or so acres of these different habitats that are found throughout California. And at this point, I had no idea where I was going in the garden. So I was just kind of wandering around and taking video notes to myself and just kind of enjoying myself. And it was really sweltering, and I had a giant sun hat on, but I was starting to get a little delirious from the heat. And so the inspiration to use the datura in my bandana came from a video note that I took where I was definitely dehydrated and a little delirious, and looking at the datura and wondering why I never saw them in bloom and always saw them wrapped up. And then once I was home and in front of a fan and had ice water, looked up the answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
I'm sorry, Eliza, you were going? No, okay. Just real quick, kind of the same. I found that the heat was the biggest challenge while I was there, and I was always bringing plenty of water and a big hat and dressing in, breathable clothes. But I did feel like I embraced the heat, and I think the last day I was there, I came before noon, and it was 96 degrees when I left at like 11:30. And I really felt like the intense heat almost acted like a sauna that deepened whatever sort of experience I was having trying to listen to the environment. So that I felt like it ended up being sort of a useful thing for me. But yeah, there was so much going on, the fires and everything. It was really kind of hectic to try and plan time there.
Yeah, I would echo that the intense heat and the smoke and the dehydration that happened even after talking from this actually put me in this strange trance state where I couldn't think very hard about what I wanted to do, and I just had to be very receptive and slow and listen, which I thought was a really beautiful way of working. And it was also a constant reminder of kind of the high stakes of what we're up against as thinkers and makers and community members and artists. So I actually appreciated how intense and catastrophic it felt to be there.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went was right when you told us, the artists, that we got the residency, but before it was announced or officially began. So I was there like very beginning of August. And then I remember driving in that there was a big smoke plume from some fire that's beyond Claremont. So that was sort of like already like a precursor to the second time I went with the heat. And then while I was finishing the video, finding out that two of my friends lost their homes in Carmel and also in Bonnie Doon, so kind of Santa Cruz area. So I think all that again, like kind of painted what I was kind of thinking about while making the piece. And again, about the idea of like feeling like the home that we're familiar with kind of spiraling out of control a little bit, like from familiar to unfamiliar almost.
For me, I enjoyed the experience of, maybe not enjoyed it, but I felt like the heat to some extent put me in the same boat as a lot of the animals. I remember noticing, when it's really hot out, you see the squirrels doing their belly flops on the ground. And there's a fountain, and it's actually in the spot in the garden where my pieces are displayed in the Percy C. Everett Memorial. And I remember visiting that spot, and there were just a ton of birds like flocking to it, including like hummingbirds just drinking straight water. And I've never seen that before, of like hummingbirds visiting a fountain and drinking water. And it just really, I was like, I'm in the same boat as you guys. And I really felt that really strongly. Although of course, then that inspires the reflection of, well, I'm really not in the same boat as you, because I can go inside and turn on my air conditioning, and you are here experiencing climate change like relentlessly. So it just kind of sparked those kinds of reflections for me.
All right, thank you for sharing. Let's see, we have another question. Again, unmute yourselves and answer as you wish. What about being here at California Botanic Garden impacted your work in a way that you can now see in the work that you created as a result of the residency?
For me, I think it was really, really valuable for my work to be in a space where other people are specifically there to appreciate and learn about nature. A lot of the time that I spend outside is hiking in, so-called wilderness areas, where you might come across other people, but you kind of do your best to avoid other people. And so it really helped guide my thinking to be in a place where everyone is you're not going there to get away from other people. You're going there to, because it's this enclosed space, you're to some extent going there to enjoy and appreciate and learn about nature in the same shared space as other people. So that sort of helped refine my thinking as far as like creating a piece of artwork that it's kind of for people all together who are learning together. It's not a very eloquent way to put it, but it set it apart from my other artwork, which the viewer of the work is less apparent in the work itself. It's more of like, it's like a window into a completely natural scene. And so that really, you know, helps create a line of separation between that type of work that I do, where the viewer is not a part of it, and then this piece where it's the viewer is really a part of the work.
I would just say that the thing that I really appreciated most about the residency was I've mostly shown in galleries, but a lot of sort of odd contexts as well, like, you know, backyards and sort of outdoor spaces. And I really always appreciate any time I'm able to bring my work out into an environment that is not so, yeah, stymied by the trappings of the art world. And I think that was something that I really got a lot of value from and would love to do a lot more of in the future. And the garden was such an amazing context to be able to make work and also to show some work. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would echo that I would like to continue thinking about making work for and showing work in places that are not specifically fine art, but that are about plants and water and soil. And it really kind of opened a door that I hope I can keep propped open in terms of where I can think and show things.
All right, anyone else, or should I move on to our final question? I'll move on to our final question, and then after I pose this question to the group, audience, this is your chance to send in questions. We'll take a few live Q&A questions with our artists. Okay, so final question from me for the group. Since we all spend a lot more time at home now than we maybe did before, what is your definition of home, and how has it evolved over this year?
I mean, I feel like I don't have a straight answer for that, because I feel like that was sort of the musing that I was doing in the video. But something that I have been thinking about is just the footprint of my apartment. And I think also because I was watching a sci-fi series recently, being like, wow, it's like living in like a, you know, like international space, like the size of it, kind of like living in an international space station or like in a Mars pod or something. Just especially because for health reasons, I need to be careful about going out too much. So it has like my world has really collapsed. So it's kind of a strange way to think about it in terms of my home being such a small pod in a way.
I think that informed by the work that I did for the residency, at least for now, I'd say that home is a common, it's a feeling that you have on both like a spatial level, but then also on like a place level, like the place that you create with like your rituals and your relationships, your impermanent objects that you fill your home with, or you fill your home like surroundings with. Yeah, what you do, what you think, and yeah, combined with the spatially specific place. My kind of home base when I was at the garden was there's this ring-shaped bench that's off the trails. It's kind of near that area with the 50-acre expanse of all of the different habitat gardens, and it's kind of removed enough that every time I was there, and I went there every single time I went to the garden, no one ever passed by me. I was always just by myself, and I would always go there after having walked around the garden for a bit, and I would just take stock of the photos I had taken and the thoughts I'd had and the notes that I the video notes that I had taken and the sketches I wanted to do. And so yeah, that kind of became my home in the garden at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought of home as something that you sort of make, less so a physical place, but spending all the time at home. You definitely examine it from a lot of different angles. And I liked a lot of what some of the other artists were saying in Miwa in your talk, the notion, I forget the word, but of your home becoming strange to you. Um, is sort of with you as we spend so much time at home, but also through this experience. Born and raised in California, and have always thought of it as my home, and it's a big part of my creative practice as well. But it is starting to feel strange and slightly hostile, especially in this moment. So, yeah, that's a, I don't know, just a development that I wasn't expecting. In the recent times. I still love it here, but it's getting kind of intense.
Something that struck me during this time was the way that we assign value to places in our lives, whether it's like our physical house that we live in, or for me, like places that I like to hike or restaurants that we go to. And I sort of like, I became aware that there's sort of this hierarchical value system that, like, you know, I give myself, like, I don't know the right way to put it. This is the first time I'm really like thinking about this, but giving myself credit for going to one place and like another place gets less credit. It's kind of like a weird thing to say, but to illustrate that, during the pandemic, I live really close to the LA River, which I've always enjoyed, but I started spending a lot more time walking and enjoying nature there because I felt like, you know, at least at the beginning, it wasn't really okay to go out hiking like I would normally do. And I just became a lot more engaged with this space that's near me that, like I said, I've always liked, but like it suddenly felt more rewarding to spend time there because I had sort of like the pressure taken off of me to like go further afield or explore something, you know, newer or further or whatever, you know, whatever the case might be. It was this sort of this place that was really close to home, and I really valued the chance to dig into a little bit. And I think my perspective will always be shifted in that way going forward, of remembering that like there's a lot of overlooked spaces that can be enjoyed and appreciated just as much as more like glamorous ones, I guess.
If I can come in again, there was a recent article by a microbiologist named Rob Dunn about how, because we are not interacting, like physically interacting with people outside, or, you know, sharing spit particles and stuff, and that we're kind of becoming these islands of our own microbiome with our pod. So we're swapping, you know, bacteria and fungi and stuff like that with the people in our pod, but not with the wider world. So we're kind of like becoming these Galapagos islands of microbiome. So I thought that was interesting, as well as kind of what we allow to come into the house or not, and how that kind of like starts to kind of cultivate kind of our spaces in a way. So that was another thing that I've been thinking about, kind of based on the article, just how we have made our world kind of smaller, but it's kind of like cultivating a culture, whether it be bacteria and fungi that's, you know, just in our own spaces, within our pod and the bodies of the people who we're closest to, or even just rituals and kind of, I don't know, culture ideas that's kind of become closer because, you know, I mean, we talk to people on Zoom or on the phone or text, but it's kind of become a much closer in space for a lot of us.
All right, wonderful. We will go ahead and take a moment here. Audience, this is your time to send us in your questions, and we will ask our panel of artists here any of the burning questions you have for them. So you can, submit your questions one of two ways. We have down below, there is a chat box. You can chat, that'll send it in to us, and we will read the questions to the artist, or there's a Q&A section. You can also send in a question that way. My colleague Kristen here is going to read the questions as they come in. Or actually, while we wait a moment for some questions to come in, I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight and let you know that further than this artist talk, we have the on-site exhibition here at California Botanic Garden. We're located in Claremont, California, and the on-site exhibits are going to be live and on through October 1st of this year. The online portion of this exhibition, which features everybody's work in its entirety really, is located on our website, calbg.org. That's California Botanic Garden, calbg.org, and you'll be able to watch the two videos as well as view everybody else's art that we talked about tonight. And that will be live on our website through December 1st of this year. Let's see.
While we wait for more questions to come in, I just wanted to make a comment off of Miwa's article that she was talking about. I was just reading earlier today something by Jenny Odell, and she was talking about our perception of strangers, and there was a passage in there that kind of struck me as I was reading it, and I just remembered it, which was how, as we're so isolated from our neighbors, our surroundings just kind of seem like these kind of impenetrable walls. You don't really think of them as like other hubs, and you see yourself as like this main character. Your home is kind of this central hub of all activity, until you realize, if you get to know your neighbors, which is more doable in non-COVID times, that everyone kind of sees themselves that way, and everybody's own home is their own central hub of activity, and it can really change the way that you look at your own community, your own neighborhood.
Thank you. Let's see, I'm not so sure if we have a shy audience. Do we have any questions coming in?
It doesn't look like we have any that haven't been answered in the chat already or by you all in your conversation. So we can wait a few more moments and see if we get any other questions.
Absolutely. And again, taking a moment, while we're taking this moment, to thank the generous sponsors of this exhibit, the Matreyek. They are the ones that allowed this exhibit to happen for us.
There's a question for Eliza that they're commenting on how beautiful the backdrop is and how very California it is. Are you located in California at the moment?
Yeah, I'm in Mount Washington. I live in a one-room cabin with cats who like to crawl on my computer screen, so I'm outside in the yard, and they're yelling for my attention inside. So I'm in Mount Washington, LA.
Thank you.
My cat also knows that it's dinner time and is making himself heard.
Wonderful. We should have a Artist Talk 2.0, feature the cats, right? Okay, well, I think that that looks like that's all the questions we actually have. Nothing too wild for tonight's Q&A. I just want to thank, again, our sponsors, the Matreyek, the 5 talented artists that we had work here for this 3-week residency. We were so grateful that you shared your work and have it on display here in the garden for us to share with our visitors and for you to share with friends, family, colleagues. And thank you again for everybody who joined us as our lovely audience tonight. You can, again, find the work on site and online as well, and we hope you take advantage and enjoy it while it's up. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. I hope you have a great rest of your week and a great rest of 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Stay safe.